Oh, I guess I start. Sam's not here. Happy Devils Wednesday! My name is Nick Villano, and you are listening to the State of the Fan Address on the Let's Go Devils Podcast Network. I am editor-in-chief of the Pucks and Pitchforks blog, Nick Villano. I am here with lead writer of Pucks and Pitchforks, as well as the editor-in-chief of The Windy City and the editor-in-chief of Southside Showdown. Oh, I got it. We're good. Vinnie Parise. Vinnie, how we doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Nick. It's great to be on here with you. We've been doing this Devils thing together for a pretty long time now, and I love it. I'm excited to be here. Let's do this.
Let's do this. It's very rare that it's just you and me in a podcast. You've either been a guest or you've been with me and Sam. It's been a long time since it's been just you. Is this the first time because I've done stuff with you and your brother. Have we ever done a one-on-one?
I don't think we have done a one-on-one. The closest I can think of is like us playing NHL 20 together or something like that. Besides that, I think this is our first time just straight up, because I know you came on Bar Down Talking Hockey with me and Joey Parise, and then I think you did one time with me and Frank Mueller, my other co-host on that show, my cousin. And yeah, so this is our first time on the Let's Go Devils podcast, just us two.
Let's go. I'm ready to go. So we have, Vinny, it's weird to say that we have a lot to talk about because not a lot has gone on, but there's still a ton to talk about because it's September. We are 1 month away from true Devils hockey. I'm so excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for the season to start. I want to forget that baseball exists because I'm a Yankees fan, and that's just a miserable experience right now. Even though they've won the last two games, I can't even talk about baseball. And you're a White Sox fan, so that season hasn't gone swimmingly either. So let's talk some hockey. Have you seen the rookie camp rosters?
I have seen the rookie camp rosters. There's a lot to be excited about. And, of course, the college kids aren't going, which takes Luke Hughes out of the equation. But outside of that, yeah, and I'm looking at the roster, though, and I'm like, holy crap, there are some guys here that could be on the team at any given point in the season. They could get called up at X time. They could make the team out of camp. We've seen guys on the list that have already made their NHL debut, thinking of guys like Vukojevic and Kevin Ball and Alexander Holtz. I think everybody's kind of excited to see how he progresses this season. So, yeah, I'm all in on the Devils training camp, prospect
absolutely.
challenge.
Yeah, and do you know who I'm really excited about, Vinny?
Who's that?
I'm really excited about? I want to see, because here's the thing. I had high hopes for Graham Clark. Dude has an NHL shot in juniors. Dude can score. He couldn't stay healthy. He couldn't stay healthy with the Ottawa 67s when they had that yoked team with a Hoytuk and Kevin Ball and a couple other Devils prospects, along with other big prospects from the NHL. Only played 15 games that season, but I think he had 14 points, was scoring like a madman. He comes to the AHL. There's always going to be an adjustment period, but this kid has a shot. And, he's one of those – there's a couple players like this. Tyce Thompson's another one that's kind of in this same realm. Where if he really worked on his game in this offseason, he could be a surprise that just makes the roster right out of training camp. But if Graham Clark kind of surprises some people at this prospect camp, it's different than Jesper Bratt when Jesper Bratt made the roster. But it's a similar formula, right? Where if you really impress the coaches, the scouts, the general manager, the front office at this rookie camp, they're going to pay attention to what you do in training camp. And then they're going to pay attention to what you do in the preseason. And then you're going to force them to make a hard decision. Ty Smith did this too in his rookie season. And they ended up sending him to juniors, which it looked like the right decision at the time. He's no longer a part of this organization. So I guess that doesn't really matter either or. But Graham Clark is a player I'm very interested to see. Did you get better in the offseason? Did you work on your game? Did you continue to grow as a player? And he's just somebody I'm super interested in. Is there anyone like off the chain? Like obviously we're interested in Nemec. Obviously we're interested in Alexander Holtz. And even guys like Riley Walsh, that's probably an obvious one. Is there somebody like maybe not so obvious that you're interested to see?
Yeah, so a lot was made when the Devils drafted Chase Stillman in the first round a couple years ago. It was like kind of a reach a little bit. Do we trust Fitzy and what he's doing with his drafting? He took Mohamedoulan a little ahead of schedule, like when all that went down. Stillman's kind of in the same case. It's like, really, we drafted Chase Stillman, but it is what it is. They took him. Now you got to hope he lives up to being a late first round talent. And if he comes in and impresses in this training camp, Fitzgerald is going to look really smart. And I'm not saying he's going to be a difference maker at the NHL level, but he's going to be given the opportunity. And so when I'm looking at this list, I'm like, okay, well, he sticks out. Philip Bratt, of course, Jesper Bratt's brother. I don't know if that's just because of the namesake and giving him an opportunity, but you would think that, there's got to be a reason they brought him in. They don't just bring in every single person's brother. And then I really liked what I saw from Nikita Ahotuk in the regular season last year. He got called up. He made a difference from time to time. And I was like, wow, he might actually be able to, if he's a 7th D and your 7th D is this good, I'm okay with it. So seeing what these guys are able to do come training camp, I think are kind of the less obvious ones. Like you mentioned, obviously we're excited to see Simone Nemec, Riley Walsh, Alexander Holtz. I would even consider, like you said about Walsh, I would say the same thing about Nolan Foote. Nolan Foote was a return in the trade with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Blake Coleman. We all loved Blake Coleman. You got the first round pick. Well, if Nolan Foote turns into a pretty good scorer as well, then, the trade looks really nice. We'll see what he's able to do this year. But I liked his game in the AHL last year playing for Utica. And then when he got the call, he looked like he fit in. He's not necessarily that point per game type of forward. I'm not sure that that's ever going to be the case. But he looked like someone who could make a difference from time to time. So if he's playing on a wing on a pretty good third line, like let's say Dawson Mercer plays center full time, they move him back to center at some point this season. You put someone like Foote on his wing. Can he find him and make plays with him? I think it's possible. Then, of course, if Dawson Mercer plays wing or something like that, and you find somebody else to put Foote with, whether it be like Eric Holla or something like that, I don't know. But I'm excited to watch him as well.
Can I tell you something that surprised me? I'm surprised that Jack Dugan's not on this roster. I don't know if this has anything to do with the type of deal he signed. He's a player I'm really excited about. And the Vegas Golden Knights just kind of gave up on him. And first, let me ask you this. Do you think the shine has worn off on the Golden Knights?
No, I don't. Okay. Like in general?
Just like everybody used to love the Golden Knights. How do you hate the expansion team that's making the playoffs every year and they're doing everything to win and they're trading for Mark Stone and they're trading for Max Pacioretty? I feel like that shine has kind of worn off. Like they
absolutely.
could do no wrong and everything they do is you got to follow it.
Yes, absolutely. They are not perfect by any means. There's really nothing likable about them anymore. They've been good every single year except last year, and they still just barely missed the playoffs. And, they had Jack Eichel have 25 points in 30-something games, and Mark Stone had 30 points in 30-something games. Like, it was definitely like a lowly season for them. If you mean shine in terms of like how good I think they have a chance to be this year, if they get a goalie, I think they could be a cup contender, like a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. But until they figure out that goaltending position, that's another thing they haven't handled very well. It seemed like Marc-Andre Fleury left out of there, not necessarily as happy with things went. We all remember the meme that came out during the bubble with, the thing being stabbed through his back. His agent put it out. And then Robin Leonard is clearly Alan Walsh. And then obviously Robin Leonard is very dissatisfied with how he's been treated by the Vegas Golden Knights. So, there's definitely the shine of them in terms of everybody loving them. I don't think that exists for any team in the league right now. It might exist the first year the Kraken are good, but the Kraken aren't going to be good for a while. So, I really don't think that that's there for the Golden Knights anymore. No.
I'm trying to figure out why he's not there. Is it because he's too old? He's 24. I get that. So you would just think that he's coming to a new team. He wants to build chemistry with these players. He's a guy who thinks, he probably thinks he's an NHL player, or he thinks that he could be an NHL player, right? He's somebody who came out of the NCAA with a ton of fanfare, was teammates with Tice Thompson. They were a dynamic duo together. I'm assuming that they're going to put Tice, unless Tice dominates, the preseason. They're going to put him in the AHL, just maybe even get the best out of Jack Dugan. You know what I mean? Like, think the long term, play the long game with that. But him not being here, but Tice isn't here either. From the roster that I saw, Tice Thompson's not there either. So maybe they're doing something different. Yeah, maybe they're doing something different. Maybe they're practicing maybe a more specific thing, and they didn't think game action was the best place to build that chemistry. Maybe they think that the practice is. I'm not sure. I'm just surprised that I don't see Jack Dugan on this roster.
Yeah, and I think that's fair to wonder. I don't know if there's an age limit at all. I mean, that would make sense, right? Like, would you bring in a 26-year-old rookie? Like, would you have Kirill Kaprizov if you were the Wild a couple years ago come to this prospect camp and just die? I don't think that's good for anyone. But at the same time, neither of these two guys are on that level. But yeah. I don't know. And Fabian Zetterlund's not there either. And I don't know why he's not there. I thought he was actually a rather noticeable player when he got called up last year. That's a name I was looking for. But there's no way any of these guys are much older than Arni Talviti, right? He's been with the Devils organization forever. I think I butchered his name. I haven't said it too many times. But I remember when he was at Penn State and before his injury, everyone was like, oh, Arnie, he's going to be amazing. And it just really hasn't panned out up to this point. But, I mean, if he's at camp, I don't see why other people would be.
He blew out his knee in the World Junior final that one year when he helped. I think it's, Finland, right? He's with Finland. He's a Finnish. When he took Finland to the final that one year, the World Junior finals, and he tore up his knee. And he was never the same. He tried to play 2 seasons at Penn State, and he regressed pretty stupendously. And I thought he just, some of these players need 2 years to get over a torn ACL. So I thought maybe, you get 2 years away, but he's just, I don't know, man. Well, that's sad because I had high hopes for him. He looked like a steal. I think they got him in the 4th or 5th round, and it just hasn't clicked. I'm trying to figure out why. I'm trying to figure out what the purpose is. But yeah, I mean,
you got to think back when that was the case, and he was one of the, not top prospects with the Devils, but someone that you had relatively high hopes for. There was no Jesper Bratt yet. There's no Jack Hughes. There's no Nico Hischier. Yegor Sharangovich hadn't had the elevation that he has up to this point. Someone like Miles Wood would have been considered way below Talviti at that point in time. Like, he's been passed up, and through injury and regression, that happens sometimes. So it's up to him to kind of re-elevate himself again and get himself back into what Devils people and Devils fans will see as a legitimate opportunity to make the team. If he dominates in this prospect camp and then he has a really good showing in training camp in the preseason, there's no reason to just shove him to the side. I mean, we've known about this guy for a long time. This just kind of feels like his last chance with the team before next year he becomes a Zach Senyshyn, for example, where another team gives him a PTO and maybe sees what happens, because Senyshyn never worked out for the Bruins. I remember Joey Parise used to say Senyshyn was going to be a superstar with the Bruins. We all saw how that turned out. You left Matt Barzal on the board. But, I mean, it's a crapshoot with some of these guys, especially after they suffer these injuries.
Yeah. And that's a perfect transition. That's what we call a professional transition on this show, Vinny. Is that let's talk about Zach Senyshyn, the newest member of the New Jersey Devils. The Devils signed Senyshyn and Thomas Hickey, a defenseman and Senyshyn's a forward, right? I don't even know. Yep. This guy is so off my radar. He wasn't even somebody I was considering, to be honest. But Senyshyn's a forward. They signed Hickey, the defenseman. Hickey has a legitimate shot to make this team if they can make the cap work. There was a report by Daily Faceoff that the Devils were in on Zach Aston Reese, but they were worried he would make the team and they couldn't make the cap work. Senyshyn's an AHL player right now. Even if he comes in and just dominates camp. I'm talking stupid, lifted up over his head like Macho Man Randy Savage dominates. He's still going to start in the AHL if they sign him. There's nothing that they're going to sit some of these young players fighting for a spot. They're not going to sit them for Zach Senyshyn, who's never shown an NHL caliber anything. So they're going to make him work for it and make him prove himself. Thomas Hickey's a different story. I think he has a legitimate shot at the 7th defenseman spot. That fill in every other night to give a different look, kind of change up the pace. He plays a certain kind of game. I think that, he hasn't played a ton of NHL minutes, which might be good, might be bad. He's used to being in the owner's box, so maybe he's willing to take that role. He's going to be, I think he's 33, so he can kind of play the leadership role a little bit, but I don't know how much a 7th defenseman is going to play a leadership role. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on these two tryouts, professional tryouts?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with Senyshyn. People might remember that McDavid draft, the 2015 draft. There were 3 Bruins taken in a row: Zaboral, DeBrusk, and Senyshyn. After that went Barzal, Connor, Brock Besser. I mean, they tweaked. And so now Senyshyn is looking for a new home
in the second round.
Yes, exactly. Joel Eriksson Ekman, a great player for the Minnesota Wild. Not like a superstar, but just a solid second, third line
really
center
good player. There. He could be a superstar.
I like Joel Eriksson Ekman a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And so if the Devils, they see the first round talent, the Bruins didn't go like way off the board there. They just made 3 picks that didn't really pan out. DeBrusk is okay. But now that Senyshyn's got a new fresh start, new fresh organization, he's going to have a chance to make an impact at the AHL level. Then if one of the Devils' right wings gets hurt throughout the season, maybe he's called up and he gets a look. Stuff like that happens all the time. He's definitely not going to ever live up to being the 15th overall pick. But, you give Senyshyn a chance. If he proves his worth, you sign him to a 2-way contract, and you go from there. As far as Hickey, I think of the Devils' defense. I go right off the bat: Hamilton, Graves, Siegenthaler, Severson, and then the bottom pair can go a bunch of different ways. Obviously, I feel like I'm missing a big one. Is there a big one that I'm forgetting that's like for sure going to play?
Marino.
Who?
Marino.
Oh, yeah, John Marino, of course. Yes, duh. He traded for Ty Smith. And then, so that 6th spot, it could go a bunch of different ways. Brennan Smith, I think, is obviously probably got the front track to get that job. You can use Hickey in a bunch of situations. And depending on where the Devils are in the standings late in the season, you're going to see guys call up. They're going to sign Luke Hughes. As soon as Michigan is done, Luke Hughes will probably make his NHL debut. There's obviously going to be injuries. Kevin Ball fits in certain places. I'm sure Vakojevic could get another look. Ahotuk will be around. And so when that time comes, Hickey's going to be the first out the door. But to start the season, there's no harm in having a veteran guy who's been around, made deep playoff runs with the New York Islanders. If I recall correctly, he scored a big overtime game-winning goal when the Islanders were like in the Tavares days. And I want to say, I can't remember who it was against, but he scored a big overtime goal. It might have been against Florida back when Florida had like Luongo. And it was a great thing for him, and he's got that experience. He could bring it to this team. You said, I don't know how much a 7th defenseman could have in terms of leadership. I agree with you, but he could just kind of have like a calm presence in the room that makes guys like, oh, I get why this guy lasted so long in the league, even if it's just on a PTO in 2022. And, maybe it helps calm the nerves of some of the young guys on the team. Maybe he helps a guy like John Marino get adapted, like, hey, this is what it's like to join a new organization and stuff like that. So I don't hate either move at all. I think both of them, neither of them have like a real high ceiling on helping the Devils get over the hump into the playoffs or whatever. But I think there's little things that each PTO here can provide that help the Devils kind of in the short term and then maybe the long term if they get lucky. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it was 2016. I just looked it up. I think they gave them a 2-1 lead over Florida in 2016. So, I mean, that's 6 years ago now, so it's it's not entirely relevant, but it's funny, apparently there was something called Hickey time, that Thomas Hickey it was kind of like the John Moore scenario where he was best in overtime. So, and it's funny, there's just players like that. Like I said, John Moore. Yeah. We remember John Moore. We wanted him on the ice at all times. That was the only time I ever got a Bucci overtime challenge right, is when I picked John Moore one time. I think it was against the Penguins, actually. But we knew how John Moore was in all other situations. It's just a different kind of game to be good at 3-on-3. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. If I were to predict right now, I don't think either of these two players, unless Decision makes the AHL, I don't think either of these players are making the roster. I think it's just camp battle kind of situations. Maybe they can push themselves to get on another team. There's just not a lot of room here. I can build an entire roster that makes a ton of sense without Alex Holtz, without Tice Thompson, without Mike McLeod, without whoever. There's no real tweener player. I'll go through it real quick. You got Hughes, Sharangovich, and Mercer on the first line. You got Nico, Bratt, and Palat on the second line. You got Tatar, Holla, and Johnson on the third line. Then you got Bastion, Boquist, and Wood on the fourth line. Who of those 12 players are you not putting in the lineup every night? Maybe Boquist, right? Maybe.
I loved the way Boquist ended last season. He got into double digits for goals, and he looked like a guy. Like, I remember when I did my prospect pyramid a couple years ago, and I had him in the second tier. Like, we thought very highly of Jesper Boquist at one point. And last year, he kind of I don't want to say he changed the way he played a little bit, but he was hanging out down low more often than not. He wasn't trying to be Jack Hughes out there. He was just going to the front of the net, scoring goals in an interesting fashion. And I think he absolutely could be like a high-end fourth-line player. You might remember when the Rangers were really good prior to their whole little rebuild, like in the Lundqvist days. They had a really good fourth line always. And guys like Michael Grabner and stuff like that. Why can't Boquist be a guy like that? And Miles Wood is so fast, so physical, so strong. A skilled player like Boquist can take advantage of his speed and his willingness to get into dirty areas. And then I think Nathan Bastian, we think the world of Nathan Bastian. I think you probably agree with me on that. Sam Wu and I on the Let's Go Devils pregame show last year probably talked about Nathan Bastian. He had to be like one of the 5 most talked about players on our podcast because we just enjoyed what he did for the Devils. It seemed like he played the game hard. He played the game the right way, front of the net. Nobody's messing with his teammates if he has anything to say about it. So I agree with you. None of those guys, but if there was someone on there that you named that could be considered fringe, it would be Boquist. Okay, so who are you replacing him with? There are a bunch of different options. You brought up Holtz. Okay, there's guys like Zetterlund, Tice Thompson. There are a bunch of forwards that could come up and make an impact, but that forward group you named there kind of got me going a little bit. I like thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that if you do, let's say Holtz makes the team, right? It's been proven that you don't want him on. I don't want him being centered by Holla or Boquist or whoever else you're going to put on the fourth line. Let's say McLeod does make the team. Not even getting into that, but let's say whatever. Yep. Let's say he makes the team. Yeah. I don't want Holtz with either of them, so I'd want him with Hughes or with Heischer. So that means who are you going to knock down to the third line? I guess you could do Mercer. Right? You can move Mercer to center and then move Holla to the fourth line. But Vinny, I know you follow Boston, right? Just because your brother and Joey's a big Boston guy. Do you know who Holla centered last year?
Do I know who did Holla center last year? Was it DeBrusk and no? DeBrusk probably played with Holla at certain points. Did Charlie Coyle play wing or did he play third line center? Was it Coyle and DeBrusk?
Incorrect. He played the most minutes with David Pasternak and Taylor Hall.
That's funny.
You're going to tell me that this guy isn't going to be good enough to be your third or fourth line center. So I don't want Holtz with him because I think he needs offensive players to do the heavy lifting, and Holtz just isn't there. We saw that. He can't do it on a consistent basis. But if you put him with Tatar and Johnson, I think the desperation of that line could be something good. Or you could put him with Bastion and Wood, and I think he'd do a good job he would do a good job of setting them both up. They both have, joke all you want about Wood running into the goalie. He showed that when he's going, he can finish. And Bastion is an underrated finisher. He's somebody who, when he gets a good spot, he can finish. He just never really had Him and McLeod make sense chemistry-wise, but their games don't really fit each other, right? Like, Bastion's not fast, and McLeod is a million miles an hour. It just never fit. They have immense chemistry, so when they're in the zone together, they could find each other. They kind of know each other like the back of their hand, but on the breakout, it does never make sense. Your fourth line is spending a lot of time in the defensive zone, so that part just never clicked. You put him with Eric Holla, was a different kind of game. Slow it down. Let's make them figure out what we're gonna do next, instead of like lightning fast. Let's get it up the ice. Let's make strategic moves. I think that's gonna work really well with Bastion, and I know Wood is a million miles an hour, but he's a breakaway guy. That's not what McLeod is. McLeod wants to get up there. He's going to get in the middle of the ice and look for somebody to pass to. That's not Miles Wood. Miles Wood's going to get up the ice and shoot the puck, and that'll give Bastion and Hall enough time to get into the offensive zone and get set up. Them being on the fourth line together kind of gets me going. And when I think about it, you could put Dawson Mercer in between Tatar and Johnson, or you can even put Boquist in between Tatar and Johnson if you want to keep Dawson on that first line. You want to start Holtz in the AHL. But if Holtz starts on the Devils, and you want to put Mercer back on that third line to play center where he was at his best, you want to put Hull on that fourth line, you could have a really interesting lineup where you have four lines that are just rolling all the time. There's some risk with it. There is. This is not like, it's not four lines like Boston had at their peak where you knew four lines were going out and they could score at any time. But it's four lines that if this hits like the chemistry I think it's going to hit, this is going to be a very exciting team.
They'll also just naturally be better defensively with some of the additions that they made, and I think the goaltending is probably going to be significantly upgraded this year. Blackwood could only be better. I mean, you saw the piece for Pucks and Pitchforks. Blackwood could only be better, and Vitek Vanacek is an upgrade over most of the players that played for them. There's no John Gillies. Okay, I like Nico Dawes, but he's a couple years away. I think he got thrown into the fire. I think that could help him long term, but it also could hurt him long term. So we'll see about him. But the goaltending is going to be better. The forwards, they're going to be able to use that chemistry to kind of do what they got to do. I kind of like some of the combinations you threw at me there. Like if Mercer wants to play center, there's so many good options for him. I'm with you. I would use Holtz on a top two line. If you're going to have him play bottom 6 minutes, just put him in the AHL. Let him keep developing. Make him be so obviously ready for the NHL that they have no choice but to put him in the top 6. Okay, I think Sharon Govich is a little more predicated on his centers than Holtz. I think Holtz's ceiling as a winger that drives play is higher than Sharon Govich's, but Sharon Govich is a much more proven goal scorer than Holtz in the NHL. So, and obviously Jesper Bratt, I think he could drive his own line, but you're not going to put him on the third line. And I certainly don't think you're going to put Nico Hischier or Jack Hughes as a third line center. So I'm with you on that. I did not know that Eric Halla's most minutes were with Pasternak and Hall. That shocked me. I mean, I know they got David Krejci coming back this year in Boston, but I would have thought Charlie Coyle and DeBrusque played more minutes with Hall. But now that I think about it, Hall had an insane year last year, so I guess it does make sense. Insane for Hall.
For Hall,
yeah. He wasn't Patrice Bergeron by any means, but I like that. And playing with those types of players, I mean, Taylor Hall isn't what he was when he was with the Devils, but he's still freaking Taylor Hall. And Pasternak's one of the best wingers in the league. So now Halla has experience playing with guys like that. He obviously has experience playing on lower lines with teams like Vegas. And I remember when he was with Minnesota, he was always on the third line. So he could play up and down the lineup. I like this group.
We got a lot of chatter on YouTube. We talked a lot about this. Steven Engel is not big on Zetterlund. He says, well, I'm not going to say this, but Zetterlund, he doesn't think Zetterlund's good. I will say this, Vinny. We do this every year, right? We look at the player who makes a run at the end of the season when nothing's on the line, and we get excited about that. We've done it multiple times, and it's burned us in the past. We did it for Yanni Kuokkanen is a good example. A player's not even in the NHL right now. A player who got mentioned, by the way, since I'll promote Pucks and Pitchforks. I'm Pucks and Pitchforks right now. Every year I do the 5 players you forgot aren't here anymore. And Yanni Kuokkanen is one of those players because it's like you might have forgotten he was even on the roster. That's how invisible he was last year. We forget that 2 years ago he's on the first line. He was a regular first. He was the guy that helped Jack Hughes break out with Igor Sharangovich. We forget that. That was the line. Sharangovich, Hughes, Kuokkanen. Now he's gone. He's out of here. So you want to temper expectations. You don't want to get all like everybody is so excited about Zetterlund. And you're going to get guys like Steven in the YouTube chat who's just going to say, well, I'm going to go the exact opposite. Because that's like, you want to even it out. Everybody's like, Zetterlund's going to score 20. Like, every bold prediction is Zetterlund's going to score 25 goals. We need to hold our horses. I don't even think Zetterlund's going to be on the ice enough to score that many goals. So, I like Zetterlund, but I think there's a good shot he doesn't even make the roster out of training camp. What is your thoughts?
I tend to agree. I brought him up as a player that I think could be an extra forward throughout the season. I think you more or less kind of nailed what I think the forward groups are going to be. If obviously Boquist can be flipped in and out, I think he'll get a chance at some point mid-season. There's always injuries. There's guys struggling at certain points. Hey, maybe Holtz is struggling at the NHL level. They sent him down. Maybe Mercer has a sophomore slump. I'm not trying to speak that into existence. I think the world of Mercer. I'm just throwing like hypotheticals out there. That would be the case where Zetterlund, gets in the lineup. I do not see 25 goals from him this year. I mean, who on the roster at all do I see 25 goals from? I think Hughes probably does. Bratt probably does. Sharangovich very well might, and I'd be a little disappointed if he sure doesn't. Outside of those 4,
a healthy
who on the roster? Yeah, I mean, and they all were so good in the second half of last year offensively that I have a hard time seeing them not carry that momentum into this year. So I do think all those 4 guys probably get to 25 and hopefully 30 and beyond. Outside, like 25 is a rather high marker for depth players. So, yeah, no, there's no 25 goals coming from Zetterlund this season. We'll be lucky if he scores 10 goals this season.
Yeah. I mean, 10 goals from Zetterlund if he's on a 4th line, I'm excited about that. Like, we got to temper expectations, folks. There's a Facebook comment. Let me see who it's from. Sam just sent me this. From Nate Milbank. You guys see Mukmadulin get wrecked in the KHL? I want to see him succeed, but that hit does not inspire hope. Listen, guys. Eric Lindros got hit hard. Paul Kariya got hit hard. People get hit hard. And I've said this about Mukmadulin a million times. If Mukmadulin is going to be successful, it's going to be under the PK Subban model. The PK Subban model is, my skill is so good that I'm going to take 1,000,000 risks a game. And those risks are going to go 50-50. But when you're taking risks like that, and they're high-quality risks like Subban was taking at his peak, 50% of the time you're going to get a scoring chance. And then the other 50% of the time you might be left out to dry, but that's why you set them up with better defensemen. That is Mukmadulin's future here, which is part of the reason why they probably so focused on defense like they did. You're looking at a defensive core when it comes to prospects of Nemec, Hughes, Mukmadulin, same as Casey, Ahoytuk, Ball. Dougie Hamilton's going to be the veteran on that. John Marino is going to be somebody who's a veteran on that. Siegenthaler is somebody who's going to be here for a long time. I think what he signed through 2026.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a really good core. It might even be longer. It might be 2028. I got a double. I think they signed him a 6-year deal actually. The Devils have put together a really good defensive core. A lot of young players. The only person they're really paying past his prime is Dougie. And if Mukmadulin turns into nothing, okay, that stinks. You could have Jacob Peralt, or you could have had a couple other players that I really liked in that draft. But Not the end of the world because you got Mercer and Holtz in that draft, which, two very good players. And again, everybody's mad that we didn't get Schneider, who's playing fine for the Rangers. I still don't think he's that good. Can I just be? He's young, so I'll give him that. He's young. He's in the AHL. Great. He's not Keandre Miller. It's not or anything of that ilk. But
and it's also like not like the Devils. They didn't pass on Schneider. The Rangers traded up ahead of them and took him. So it's not the Devils' fault that the Rangers ended up with Schneider. It's not like taking Ty Smith over Keandre Miller like they did in 2018. You want to be mad about that? Go ahead. But
yeah, that's a weird one though, because they were on the same level, and they were like 4 or 5 picks apart. They were on the same level for a long time, and Ty Smith had the most inexplicable fall off. I think Ty Smith's going to become really, really good in Pittsburgh. But as far as the choice was, let either Braden Schneider go to the Rangers or let Dawson Mercer go to the Rangers, because the Rangers traded up thinking they were going to get their center in Dawson Mercer because he was the one who fell. And the Rangers reacted and took Schneider when they traded up and Mercer wasn't there. Sure, maybe the Devils wanted Schneider and Mercer, and they reacted by taking Mukhamadullin because it was a guy that Fitzgerald just said, screw it, I liked him, our guy got taken. Sure, maybe that happened. And it's possible. And I'm not going to say that Mukhamadulin's a good pick. I'm not going to argue that because I don't think it is. I don't think it was then. I don't think it is now. But I'm sick of the argument that the Rangers took our lunch, because at the end of the day, they wanted Mercer. They needed Mercer. They need a center still today. They need a center. So I'm not of the ilk to say that the Rangers took our lunch there, but let's not judge Mukhamadullin, what's happening in the KHL. The KHL is also a completely different game. I'm not judging Mukhamadullin at all this year. I'm just kind of going to let him grow. It was weird that he signed an AHL contract and then they loaned him back to the KHL. There's some weirdness going on with Mukhamadullin, but I'm just not making the judgment right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. We'll know about his ceiling and what he's able to bring in North America really, really soon. It's not going to be right now. It's going to be a year. What would you say, a year or two? I mean, you're not going to know for a while. And if it turns out to be a good pick, everybody's going to sing the praises of Fitzgerald and be like, wow, he really got that guy. He was probably going to go in the second round had he not gone there. But the Devils didn't have a second round pick. And then when some of these guys go in the second round and everybody's like, well, why didn't they get taken in the first round? Like you brought up Sebastian Aho. Sebastian Aho went in the second round. If someone in 2015 would have taken Sebastian Aho 6th overall, their fan base would have exploded on them and been like, what are you doing taking Sebastian Aho 6th overall? Now, look, if that draft were redone, he might go 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah, and that happens all the time with second-round picks. Absolutely. There's always players who go in that. Bergeron's a second-round pick, right?
Yep.
So there's Hall of Famers that go in the second round all the time. One player that but there's also the second round picks where you're like, how did you go in the second round? Arthur Kaliev, the guy on the Kings, is a player who I wanted the Devils to trade back into the first round to get the year they traded that pick for PK Subban. I was pounding the table to get him. I was so happy he went to the Kings, because if he went to the Predators with the pick we traded to them, I would have cried. Because I wanted him so bad on this Devils team. They needed a scorer so bad. He fit the bill so perfectly. He went before they picked, so I was like, no harm, no foul. You got Subban, everything's great. There's so much with these prospects, too. And there's so much with judging them and seeing what they're going to become, especially the defensemen. It's just so hard to formulate what they're going to become. Which, with Mukhamadullin, the problem is that you had to hope he grew correctly. He was way, way, way too lanky when they drafted him. He was just he was a stick figure. He's trying to gain weight now, and that's going to change his game, and you don't know what that's going to do. You know what I mean? You see this all the time with defensemen where they gain weight, they lose a step, and they lose a lot of the spark. I haven't seen that yet when we go doing. He still seems like he has a lot of the game that makes him really good. But you're talking about a very stressful situation. But Vinny, I don't want to get too far into a hole I'm looking at doing. I do want to ask, you brought up Chase Stillman earlier. Steven on the YouTube is asking about Stillman again. He's asking whether it's possible for him to make the roster. Any of those players can make the roster. I think Stillman has to go back to the OHL if he doesn't make the roster, though. Is that correct?
I'm wondering if it's like a Jesper Bratt situation where, like, if he makes it past 9 games, he either plays in the NHL all season long or they send him back to the OHL and see you later.
But Bratt is different because Bratt came from the SHL in Sweden. So Bratt could have went to the AHL.
Okay, then it's someone else I'm thinking of. Then there's always a situation where if they go back to the OHL, they're not coming back.
Ty Smith was in that situation where he could have started the season in the NHL.
Yes, and you have to make the decision by 9 games. And if you send them away to the OHL, it's bye-bye, see you next training camp. You're not coming back this year. And then if you play in the NHL and you get past 9 games, okay, now the OHL is not going to take you back, and you can't go to the AHL. It's literally either NHL or OHL. And so that probably is the case for Stillman. If I had to guess what's going to happen, I would assume that this year he goes and plays one more year in the OHL, just dominate down there as best as you can, and get ready to come up next year and compete for a roster spot. We don't know if Graves is going to be here next year. We don't know what's going to happen with Damon Severson. He's been on the trade block for what seems like 3 years now. Luke Hughes, I'm assuming, is for sure going to take one of those spots. Simone Nemec might make the team this year, let alone next year. I think he's a lock to be on the team.
Yeah.
So, we'll see what happens there. The AHL is an interesting place. I'm sure Stillman wishes he could play for Utica, but hey, if you go back to the OHL, there are worse things in the world than going back there to dominate and try and get your career going. But if I had to guess, I would guess no.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stillman and the forward position is just so stacked. I mean, they drafted him to be a bottom 6 forward. So there's just so many players vying for those positions right now. Like, he's a motor guy. He's similar to Dawson Mercer with less skill. Like, I guess is the best way to describe him. Like, he can win board battles, come out with the puck just because he overworks people, he outworks people. But Mercer's a very skilled player. He has other assets that go along with that motor. Maybe Mercer without the motor is a 2nd-round pick, but Stillman without the motor is a 5th-round pick or a 6th-round pick, or maybe undrafted. He doesn't even get drafted without the motor. So it's like the difference there is like Mercer still has a lot to his game, even if he was like a lazy player. But Mercer's not. He's the opposite of that. Stillman as well. He's the opposite of that. He works incredibly hard, but his work ethic is like what makes him. And I just don't see that, especially in training camp where everybody's fighting for their position. Everybody's fighting for a roster spot. Even on the other team, like everybody's fighting for every inch in the preseason because there's so much on the line. Unless you're like Hughes. Hughes is just kind of out there and just, he's doing his thing. He's trying not to get injured. Nico's trying not to get injured. They're still playing. They're still proving themselves. But everybody, there's 15 guys on this Devils team fighting for a roster spot. And I just don't think that Stillman can outwork any of them. And that's how he's going to make it to the NHL. So I actually think he's going to be, if not the first cuts, he's going to be second cuts. Because they drop like a third of the roster in that first cut. If Stillman makes it past then, he's going to be like that next cut of 5 where they want to give them one more game. But I don't think Stillman's making it very far in this training camp.
I actually completely agree. So, I mean, if he comes out and scores a bunch of goals, and like you said, you bring up the motor, if he comes out and looks like Zach Parise, which obviously is a very high ceiling, but I like the motor thing, like that's what that makes me think of, like Dawson Mercer. Mm-hmm. Dawson Mercer kind of reminds me of that. But, if you're the motor without the pure skill, then you're Miles Wood in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Maybe not the same type of game, but when you watch Miles Wood play, you're going to get 100% effort every single shift, no matter what. Does that equate to more wins than a guy like Phil Kessel, who has an incredible amount of skill, but throughout his career, he has demonstrated taking a shift off here and there and stuff like that. So it's a hard thing to predict, but I'm with you. I think Stillman, I think he could be an NHL player one day. It's just not now or anytime soon.
Vinny, let me ask you this. I'm going to do, you did a list when you first started of the top 10 players in the history of the Devils. Do you remember doing that?
Oh, yeah. My very first, I believe that's my very first professional article ever.
Was that your very first? Okay.
Yeah.
I've been teasing this for like a year, I feel like. But I have, my list is done of the 50 greatest Devils of all time. If you were to do 50, who do you think would be somebody like let's say you did 52. It's like think in your head who's a player you think you highly overvalue for their impact on the Devils. I know I'm like surprising you with this, so I apologize for that, but I'll give you mine and I'll give you a chance to kind of think about it. Just that you think you have higher, like somebody towards the bottom of the list. I'm not talking about maybe you have Ilya Kovalchuk higher. I know you would have Zach Parise higher than a lot of people and probably higher than I do too. But who's somebody that's making the list that you think is a surprise? Mine is Marek Zidlicki. I think that Marek Zidlicki was so huge on that team that made the Stanley Cup final that year, and he doesn't get the love he deserves for the impact that he had on that team. I think if I remember correctly, I just did the write-up on him. I think he had the most minutes of any player on that team in the postseason. And do you remember that he played 2.5 more seasons after that?
Oh, yeah. And he ran a power play. He ran a power play. I mean, the greatest power play goal ever scored was Kovalchuk in the 2012 Game 6 against the Rangers. Mm-hmm. And that was all because they got it back to the point to Zidlicki, and he found Henrique, who found, the rest of the team, and every single player on the ice touched the puck because of a first pass by Zidlicki. Yeah, I thought very highly of him. And I remember me and my brother used to talk very highly of him too. He used to want a quarterback like that on the Bruins, and that was before like Torrey Krug or anything like that. Like, he was a very, very good offensive defenseman. He was never like a top 20 defenseman in the league or anything like that. But I like him being on your list. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have differences of opinion. And I told Sam this I think it was last week or the week before, that the hardest guy to rank is Chico. Because, like, do I rank those Colorado Rockies seasons? And if I do I have to add other Colorado Rockies? And that just, like, messes up the whole list. And then do I have to add the Kansas City Scouts? I decided to not rank the Colorado seasons at all. None of them count. So Chico is only the Devils. So he's probably going to be lower than a lot of people expect for him to be on the list. I say that Chico Resch is on the Mount Rushmore for impact people of the Devils. Just because of how long he's been with the team. He was the star that came over from Colorado. If you have a Mount Rushmore, people are going to think I'm crazy, but I think it's Brodeur, obviously. John McMullen has got to be on there just for impact because he brought them here. I got Chico on there, and then that last spot could go to so many people. You could go. There's so many. I mean, but you got to go Lou Lamoriello. Those are the four. I don't have Scott Stevens on there. I don't have Ken Danico on there.
That's who I was thinking.
Niedermeyer on there. It's so hard to keep them off. Danico's the one that people are probably going to want to put Danico on there instead of Chico, but I got Chico on there. And I love Danico. Danico is definitely 5. But Chico is just so important to this team, and he was the play-by-play guy with Doc Emmerich, and they grew together, and they did so many playoff games together. And Chico Eats is just so legendary. Like, there's so much that they used to do that, like, they try to do now. They try to make like imagine if Chico was like at his peak broadcasting, like now in like the TikTok age or like the social media age, like doing those Chico Eats things on YouTube or on Facebook and stuff like that. Like that stuff was big before it was big. So, and Sam's like, plus Chico's on Game Day Live. We love Chico on Game Day Live. So, you got to give love to the friends of the podcast. But yeah, I mean, that's my 4, and so now I need to know yours, Vinny. I've given you some time to think. I've stretched this out as far as I can. This is how we're going to end the podcast. Who is a player you think you would surprisingly have on the list?
Okay, really quick. I want to say I love Chico Resch more than I could possibly put into words. He came down at the United Center last year, and he met me, my brother, and both of our girlfriends. And when he walked away finally, our girlfriends looked at us and go, he was neither of them know anything about who he is or where he came from.
Yeah.
And they were like, he was the sweetest man we've ever met, and he was so kind. He would absolutely be on my Mount Rushmore of most influential people involved with the Devils, not only just players. I would probably put Danica. I don't even know who I would take off, though. That's crazy because, like, Marty was just so good as a player that you almost have to put him on because he's the greatest player in the history of the team. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe Danica would be 5. I would also always give love to Chico. I can't wait to speak with him in a couple weeks. I'm honestly so excited. When I come to New Jersey in December, I think we'll get him in person again, and then we'll get to meet him again. But it's so great. I love Chico. The name that popped in my head immediately right when you said it was Adam Henrique. Because, like, Adam Henrique scored one of the biggest goals in the history of the New Jersey Devils. He sent them to the Stanley Cup final. Not just sent them to the Stanley Cup final. He scored a minute into overtime against the New York Rangers. But then I'm like, okay, that's one actually kind of chalk. Like, why wouldn't he be? He has a 30-goal season with the Devils. There's a couple years where he was, like, near the top of the scoring chain. If you're thinking of somebody who was just, like, an underrated good player, never a star, but maybe, like, a third-line player, Dinas Zubris came into mind. And Dinas Zubris had some seasons with the Devils where he gave max effort every single day, no matter what. And there was a play. I remember there was a game where the Devils played the Maple Leafs. This was a long time ago now. The Devils played the Maple Leafs at the Rock, and they were losing 3-0 in the third period. And, like, late in the third period, and they scored 4 goals in the final, like, 5 minutes of the third and won the game. And a lot of it was created by hard work by Dinas Zubris and Travis Zajac along the walls. And then you had Ilya Kovalchuk and Parise kind of doing the skill stuff on the other side of the rink. And so, yeah, Dinas Zubris, one of the most interesting players to ever play for the team. I thought there were times where he was just a solid player. He always scored in the playoffs. There were times, I'm not sure he'd be, like, near the top of the list, but I definitely think he'd be in that 30 to 50 range if I were to make the list on my own. And Zach Parise would be in the top 10. Argue with me.
It's gonna come out soon. You could argue. You argue with you. I told Sam he's got to get me a big guest. A big, we've had Grant Marshall on the horn. We've had Chico many times. Bryce Salvador. We're gonna have to get one of those former players on to talk about this because I need someone to yell at me, and I think Chico's gonna yell at me after he sees the list because he's always yelling at me. He hates when I'm critical of anybody. But he was yelling at me last year. I said something about Blackwood. He was mad at me. He called Sam. He was like, Blackwood. I went on the podcast. I'm mad at Nick. I was like, oh, no. Chico's going to yell at me.
Yeah, he loves Blackwood. Loves him. He got on us for criticizing the goaltending at all. He's like, the Nico Dawes stuff, like he's so young. And yeah, Chico will let you know what he thinks and in the most kind, pleasant way possible. It's like he's arguing with, it's like Chico's version of saying F you is like, well, he's actually doing this and he's dealing with this and he told me this morning. Oh my God, I love that man. I cannot wait for the season to start.
Yeah, and he literally goes, well, here's the thing, Nick. I think you're wrong. You're just like, okay. What am I supposed to say to that? Chico Resch thinks I'm wrong. I'm going to go. Yep. I actually amended an article one time because he messaged me. He was like, can you at least say this? And I'm like, you know what? If Chico Resch is seeing something in somebody's game that I'm not seeing, I'm going to go, let me relook at it. Let me sing. And I put an editor's note in there because Chico Resch's opinion I feel that highly of. There's not a lot of people. I've had people message me all the time. it's happened multiple times where people are in my DMs, and whether it's I've seen burner accounts, I've seen families of players, and I've seen analysts, I've seen a lot of people come in my accounts. Very rarely does anything move the needle for me. But when Chico comes and Chico, he'll text Sam something if he's mad at me. Sam will text me, and I'll be like, all right, maybe I should relook at this. And I'm not saying my opinion is higher than anybody else's. I'm really not. But, that seems to be it. Looks like I'm freezing a little bit. So I think that's the end of the podcast, Vinny.
Hey, where's the meat?
You got to know when to hold them. And I'm going to fold them right now before the internet connection starts to go haywire. But, Vinny, I want to thank you so much. Do you have anything to plug?
Yeah, so we're coming down to the end of the season for baseball, covering the two Chicago teams. And then the Chicago Bears started off with like the most insane, interesting win, got that all covered. And then once hockey season starts up, it's going to be covering the New Jersey Devils and the Chicago Blackhawks pretty heavily, and I'm excited about it. All my stuff is at Vinnie Parise on Twitter, and I'm looking forward to getting the grind going. We got just under a month before hockey season starts, and I think that's when we really shine. I love football. I love baseball. Everybody knows that about me. But once hockey season starts, then I'm really into content mode, and I'm just so excited. So it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, and listen, your Chicago Bears, they got the win in the rain.
Yep, and they're going to beat the Packers.
Hey, let's see. Let's see what happens. The Bears are eating cheese this weekend, according to Vinny. Over on pucksandpitchforks.com, I told you, we got 5 players that you forgot are on the team. That's up right now. I got an interesting piece that I think Tomas Tatar is going to make a big bounce back season, so that's up. Vinny's got his piece on the goalies, why I think it's going to look a lot better this season. Tomorrow morning, Matt he's got a piece on the rookies that you should watch in camp. I will say, he wrote it before the roster came out today. Jack Dugan is an honorable mention. I'll throw an editor's note in there. He wants to look at the entire prospect camp, rookie camp, training camp, the rookies to look at. So just kind of, what is it called? Like, delay or whatever. Don't take it to word that because he's not in rookie camp. Jack Dugan, we all thought Jack Dugan was going to be there. So just kind of like take that for what it's worth.
Take it with a grain of salt.
There you go. Yeah. But yeah, so that's going on Pucks and Pitchforks tomorrow morning. There's going to be a couple other pieces. The greatest of all time is coming out soon. I can't give you it. It's not going to come out by next week's podcast. There's so much more writing I have to do. I have to move twice this week. Moving sucks, guys. I never want to do it again. But hopefully that's it. But yeah, before I die, thank you so much. That's the end of the podcast. State of the Fan address. We'll be back next week. Everybody, happy Wednesday, and let's go Devils.